America's top command in Germany passes into civilian hands as John J. McCloy resigns as head of the World Bank for the lower-paying job of High Commissioner for Germany, succeeding General Clay.
We are delighted to have so many distinguished guests here today as we pay tribute on his birthday to one of America's most distinguished public servants. John McCloy's had a long life, 90 years, and most of it marked by unparalleled service to his country and humanity. Beginning with Franklin Roosevelt, he has served 9 presidents in a wide variety of assignments. And let me testify personally to the wisdom of John's counsel. I'm proud to say he was a member of our 1980 transition team, and I can recall the insight and advice that he gave me on American-German relations at the time. Insight and advice that are just as timely today as they were then. In a few weeks, I'll have a chance to more formally celebrate the friendship of the German and American peoples, but let me say now what no one can question. It was the heroic work of men like John McCloy during the difficult post-war period that did much to preserve world freedom and unite our two nations in friendship.
So he's a hero.
What did he get? The Congressional Medal of Honor, or?
I don't know. He had a birthday and the president is talking about it. The guy's a hero, right?
Well, I mean, not to shit on John McCloy. He's not completely responsible for everything, but he seems to have been at the center of a lot of stuff. I was looking for this footage, just to digress, which I couldn't find, which maybe I'll find this week, of John McCloy being interviewed on CBS News about this examination that CBS News did in the, I want to say the 70s, of the JFK assassination. And McCloy never answers the question about the integrity of the Warren Commission. He beats around the bush. And I think it's Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather who's interviewing him. And it turns out that McCloy's daughter worked for the president of CBS News and leaked everything to McCloy as the thing was being developed, the 4-part CBS JFK series. It must have been like maybe the 1983 anniversary or something. And McCloy just beats around the bush when asked about the Warren Commission. And there's footage that's out there, and I got to find it because I've watched it before on YouTube. I'll find it again. We'll put it up on Locals.
Yeah, definitely. We got to put on Locals. And by the way, some of that little intro might come down because British Pathé or whoever it is always claims stuff. So I hope people enjoyed that little segment. If you notice 15 seconds gone later, watch it on Rumble and watch it on Locals. Because
we on Rumble and Locals? I just want to check.
We are.
Last week we had some crash and burn or something.
Yeah, it was fascinating. We were on Locals, had our biggest response yet on Locals. It was like 580 people. And I switched screens to get a screenshot and capture the moment, and Locals crashed.
What?
You know what? We crashed Locals. I'll just take credit for that. I'll say that we personally, never mind Crowder and 130,000 people watching Rumble or this, now is us. We personally crashed Locals. They couldn't handle our traffic. So we have 50 right now. So we have a little bit of room on Locals to keep growing.
Right. What's the limit? 100 or something?
I'm not sure, but I can say the limit could be 580.
Holy cap! Maybe that's it. I mean, maybe we're capped. At 580. You got to apply for another license or something from the FCC.
It could well be. They were like, okay, you guys are using too much bandwidth. We're done with you. Sorry. We just fall over and die.
Right. Well, you got a lot of photos today. I'll give you that, Hunley. It's a lot of good photos. I don't know.
A lot.
That video is good. I don't know where to start. I guess we could start. These guys are going to have their own shows eventually, but there was a guy, not the Nazis, they're not going to have their own show. But where did we leave off last week? With Operation Alsos, they were plucking the German scientists, race against time with the British and the Russians to get the scientists. They were. This is outside of
Nordhausen.
Yeah, those are our guys, our team from Alsos, who are the scientist hunters. And then I gave you some photos of the working conditions inside Nordhausen, just which we didn't have last week. I don't know if you have those now.
Sure.
Because they said it was a factory with employees. This is
a
a rocket from White Sands, New Mexico, later in 1946. But
let's see if we can find the conditions.
our
Oh, here
first-
we go. Here we go. Good
yeah,
job.
I found this late last night in color. For anyone who thinks that von Braun supervised a normal rocket operation, these are the employees of Werner von Braun from Camp Dora, brought in thousands upon thousands. They would work for average 2 to 3 days and then
Collapse.
pass away. And no, not collapse, pass away. They were brought out on train cars, and then new ones were brought in. These are the workers inside Nordhausen, supervised by Walter Dornberger, Major General Walter Dornberger, and Werner von Braun, who was the technical advisor of Nordhausen. Dornberger ran the whole thing. Dornberger, of course, going to Bell Helicopter, and his friend going to NASA. So you talk about getting a promotion from a tough working condition. I mean, those guys, there was no food or anything. You just worked till you dropped and you were brought out with a finished product. Of course, there's von Braun and there's Dornberger on the left with a hat. That's from his car accident. We kind of left off there last week, just to not to go over it again, but just to pick up for some continuity's sake where we were last week in the Operation Paperclip story. There's some other operations going on. There was Operation Bloodstain, which Bloodstone. I'll take it back. Bloodstone. Operation Bloodstone was after the war, us going after German scientists in Soviet-occupied territory.
And Dragon Return, right?
That was a separate one. That was another one. Yeah. Bloodstone was Nazis in Soviet areas. 1948 in June. That was authorized by the State Department. That was a separate. Everybody was in on that one, apparently. They were in Soviet land, so it was every man for himself. But when you read this stuff about, which we'll get into in a second, about how this, they're looking to start a guerrilla war against the Soviets, and they go to find Nazis to help them. And among the Nazis that they find are the Ukrainian Nazis. And our relationship with the Ukrainian Nazis, which is currently going on to this day, begins in 1946, when we seek out these anti-Soviet Ukrainians who volunteer to be part of Reinhard Galen's spy network. Reinhard Galen, which we're going to get into in a second, is given tons of money by the CIA to create a spy organization throughout the Soviet and Eastern Europe. Now you say, well, why did we do that? Well, it turns out that the British had an entire spy network for decades, and they wouldn't help us. We didn't have anything, Eric. We didn't have James Bond. We didn't have Pussy Galore. We had nothing. So like we always do with the CIA, we farm it out. And we farmed it out to these Nazis, including Reinhard Galen. And these guys were treated so well. I'll give you some. Millions of dollars went to Galen. He had hundreds and hundreds of ex-Nazis. He refused to give their names to the CIA. He said, these people work for me. You're never getting their names. Okay, well, that's weird. So indirectly, they were working for us, but we didn't know who they were. And they were the worst of the worst Nazis who worked under Galen. And Galen was treated, I don't even know how to explain this, so I'm just going to tell you the truth. I'll give you an example of how well we treated Galen. Okay, you ready for this?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. You're just going, well, what could you do for Galen? You know what I mean? How about
women, wine?
Oh, no, that goes without saying, because we're going to get back into this thing. I just got off on this Galen track because in 1951, he's taken to the World Series by the CIA, Yankee Stadium, Game 1, Yankees-Giants, after the Yankees, which the Giants lose 4 games to 2. Thank God the son of bitches lost, because they stole the 1951 pennant from the Dodgers just a couple of weeks before with Thompson sitting dead red on a Ralph Branca fastball that he knew was coming because they had a telescope inside of the scoreboard, which is now revealed by the son of the giant batter who hit the home run with Willie Mays on deck. The Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant, the Giants win the pennant. Separate story. The reality of it is, a couple of days later, the World Series starts up in the Bronx, and it's 1951, the World Series, and it's the Giants and the Yankees. And who do they bring? They should have let him throw out the first ball. He should have thrown out the first pitch instead of Eisenhower. Here he is, Reinhard Gehlen, one of the evilest, nastiest of all the Nazis, gets to go to the World Series in 1951. You know what? My Uncle Lenny couldn't go to that World Series, and he fought against the Nazis in World War II. I mean, it's outrageous how they treated these people. And I'll tell you something else. The American people did not put up with this. That's why the thing was secret. Every time this leaked out, and it leaked out in the case of that little tubby guy, Walter Schreiber, if you could show him again, it leaked out through Drew Pearson and some of the other journalists who discovered through a tip that Walter Schreiber was a Nazi, was working on the U.S. payroll. And the American people flipped out because this was what, there's Schreiber right there, one of the top Nazis.
Hold on, there's a better shot of him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
1951 there.
Right. So Schreiber is told, I'm sorry, we can't protect you anymore because unfortunately the press has gotten wind of this. You're going to have to go to Argentina. And he says, like hell I am. They literally flew him to Argentina and set him up, and he went kicking and screaming, and eventually went to Argentina, met up with all his other friends who were down there. So the rat line, which people believe went through the Alps and everything else, here's the rat line going through New York to Argentina. You know what I mean? Forget about the Pope Pius helping them out in Italy. Getting back to Italy, we're going to now switch to Italy because there's a guy, you might have to watch this thing twice. There's a lot of information in this thing. I don't know if we're going to fit it in today, but there was a guy named Karl Wolff. Now, Karl Wolff, you say, well, Karl Wolff, who could Karl Wolff be? He's the highest ranking SS general in Italy during the war. He ran Italy for the Nazis. Now, Wolff, he gets a meeting in an apartment in Bern, Switzerland, and with a fireplace, and the guy's drinking wine. This is like the last year of the war, but there's still a lot of fighting going on. This may be December 1944, if you can imagine that period of time. Still fighting going on in Italy, but there's been a statement put out out of Casablanca by three men, FDR, Stalin, and Churchill. And that is that the Allies will accept nothing but an unconditional surrender by the Third Reich. The Third Reich will not be able to negotiate nor do anything other than unconditional surrender. Everybody knows this. You learn this in school. And that means we did it with the Japanese. Unconditional surrender, no negotiations, no nothing. You get nothing. We do what we want with you, blah, blah, blah. So in Bern, Switzerland, in front of a fireplace, drinking cognac, two men meet and speak in fluent German. One of them is Major General Karl Wolff, one of the fiercest Nazis ever to put on a uniform. Okay, so Karl Wolff, I guess he came from Italy for the weekend, right? He meets with this guy and he starts to negotiate himself, turning himself over to the Allies, right? And his friend that he's talking to in German, drinking the cognac, is an obscure guy named Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles negotiates. Is this Wolff here?
Yep.
Okay, it's a good shot of Wolff. Wolff and Dulles in fluent German. Now, keep in mind, in 1933, Dulles meets Hitler, and he met Mussolini in 1933, and he came back and he met Goebbels in 1933. There's a young 1933-ish Dulles.
That's a guess. I don't know, but
yeah, I think so.
Probably.
So he meets Goebbels and he meets Hitler, and later meets Mussolini. That was separate. And he comes back to the U.S. and says, nothing to worry about here, boys. These guys are on the level. Famous lines from Allen Dulles. Anyway, so Dulles negotiates with Wolff the surrender of the Italian-German forces in Italy. And this is why it's important. Stalin gets wind of this. This is the beginning of the Cold War. The stabbing in the back of Stalin by negotiating with the Nazis while the war was still going on, is what I believe and some other people believe, technically the beginning of the Cold War, because we're allies. We're allies with the Russians at this point. We all have a single front to have an unconditional surrender. And Dulles does this on his own, without the State Department, without FDR, without anybody. He does this for the deep state. I'm not saying that Dulles woke up that day and I'm going to do this. This was one of the big deep state moves. And I believe it was to launch the Cold War, because these moves that come after this is in constant friction with the State Department, constant friction backing Truman into a corner, constantly hiding out from the press, constantly doing these secret things, setting up the Gehlen organization, the arch nemesis of the Soviets, to spy on them and to begin guerrilla activity in these Eastern European countries that the Soviets now control, because those are the spoils of war. Those, I mean, what Wallace, Henry Wallace, who's a progressive, goes to FDR and then to Truman, and he says these are the intellectual spoils of war. The scientists, the Nazi scientists. Progressive Henry Wallace, who is a friend of the Soviets, says we are now guaranteed, or should be guaranteed, the spoils of war intellectually. And Wallace what is Wallace then? Wallace, famously Henry Wallace was a socialist. He was Secretary of Commerce at the time. Later, he was supposed to be the VP for, he's going to have his own episode, Wallace. But to just give you a bit about Wallace, he was supposed to be the VP under FDR. And the Democrat conservatives went berserk, and they inserted the corrupt Harry Truman from the mob operation out of Missouri that he represented out of Kansas City. So they got rid of Wallace through a smear campaign, and they inserted Harry Truman, or Henry Wallace would have been president. Now people could say, well, that's great. Okay, but they got what they wanted. They got the deep state guy. They got the guy who dropped 2 atomic bombs without even flinching on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So they got what they wanted. Whether history judges them as being correct, well, we're at a different place now, and we can look back and see that maybe this was the beginning of the Cold War, and maybe it was being done by the military-industrial complex, and maybe the fact that the Soviet Union doesn't even exist and we're still using Ukrainian Nazis against the Russians indicates that it might not have been about communism at all, Eric. And maybe the whole thing was as trumped up as the war on terror. And maybe it was the same thing about, the Muslim terrorists, where they scare the living shit out of us. And it worked with the communists. It worked with the Muslim terrorists, and it's working with the Ukrainian situation. We've seen this too many times now to be duped over and over again. But that's just my opinion.
But we got another one too, because now we're pointing it to domestic.
Right. Now we're turning it inside, which is what a lot of people indicated would happen. So that's another level, another show. But to get back to Dulles with Hitler and Dulles with Henry Wallace called these things intellectual reparation. Now, why was Henry Wallace constantly talking to the powers that be about this? And I'll tell you why. As Secretary of Commerce, Henry Wallace, this is stuff that you're not going to get taught in school. So for Smarty Matt, here's your thing for next week. Henry Wallace was inundated with phone calls at the end of the war. And it was from General Electric, it's from Dow Chemical. It was from Bell Telephone. It was from all the major corporations. And they said, we want that Nazi technology. That's where the pressure comes from. It's not from, they use the military, parts of the military, to enforce it. State Department completely against it. Media completely against it. The American people totally against it. Truman against it. Here's Henry Wallace. I'll just take a brief slug off of this. Now, this has nothing to do with Henry Wallace, because Henry Wallace is merely responding as Secretary of Commerce to the inundation he's received telephonically from corporations. And they want this technology. They feel that, we're a million light years behind. When they went into that laboratory and found the jet technology, this was like having a sex addict in a bordello. These people flipped out, and they started literally, and we're going to get into it now, shipping back the V2 rocket technology and the scientists. I mean, it was like, I think like 4 tons of documents that von Braun had secreted away in the mountainside, in the cave. He traded his, technology and his stuff for freedom and the American way of life, which is what von Braun got. He got much more than he deserved, obviously. But these other guys didn't have V2 rocket technology. They didn't have documents. They didn't have charts. They didn't have maps. They didn't have anything. So they made shit up. They said, well, we could find you the Soviets. We can do this with the Soviets. And it's a crock of shit. Okay. So when you get into the United States, when these guys, these lower level Nazis get into the United States, they're protected by a man who uses them for his own domestic reasons. And that man is J. Edgar Hoover. And part of Operation Paperclip that is very rarely talked about is the involvement of J. Edgar Hoover in using these Nazi sons of bitches to do his anti-communist domestic stuff. And that's where part of Operation Paperclip spins into where I wanted to go today domestically, because Hoover is at the peak of his power. The anti-communist fervor is at its peak. That's why these Nazis, Ukrainian Nazis, Latvian Nazis, Lithuanian Nazis, anybody with a swastika was allowed in, to get an apartment in New York. I mean, it got so crazy that's why Schreiber didn't want to go to Argentina. I mean, clearly he liked being here. It was pretty comfortable. These guys' names were in the phone book, Hunley. I mean, I'm surprised. Yeah, I mean, it's shocking today that you would think about it, but
there was a huge German contingent here too. I mean, it's not like we went over with Black Tom. So I mean,
we also went over Senator William Wild Bill Langer last week out of North Dakota, representing those Nazis, or not those Germans, I'm sorry, out of North Dakota. But the American people did not want their most hated. I mean, keep in mind, just a few months before, FDR was on the radio calling these Nazis the inhumane savages, every name in the book to describe them. And now they're learning that they're coming here to White Sands, New Mexico to work on V2 rockets. And people in the comment section all week were reaching out to us, talking about how in town these Nazis would show up wearing cowboy hats with German accents, laughing their asses off, having a great time. There's 150 Nazis, SS types in town in New Mexico there. They weren't allowed to leave the base, but they walked off every single night and just wined and dined them. They had a swimming pool. There were people who were still, in internment camps who were Jews in Germany. I mean, just think about the
and Japanese here.
And Japanese.
Technically.
And Japanese. I mean, I don't want to undersell the position of the military, because a lot of the military was behind this. And some of them were not, but a lot of them were. And I think they were doing the bidding of GE and these other corporations. Again, not unlike today. And here's a letter. You talk about Nazi generals and generals in general. Here's a general who's writing a letter. I just want to read the letter from this general about what's going on in Germany immediately after the war, like weeks after the war, right? So this guy writes.
He's a Nazi, right?
No, I'm just saying, here's a letter. Okay. It's to the headquarters, to some general. He's writing to another general. So far as the Jews are concerned, they do not want to be placed in comfortable buildings. They actually prefer to live as many to a room as possible. They have no conception of sanitation, hygiene, or decency, and are, as you know, the same subhuman types that we saw in the internment camps. Okay, so that's an interesting letter. And then he finishes his statement. He says, he says, Harrison and his ilk, he's now talking about domestic politics. Harrison and his ilk believe that the displaced person is a human being, which he is not. And this applies particularly to the Jews, who are lower than animals, okay? We entered that synagogue, which was packed. There was some synagogue they rigged up outside of Auschwitz. We entered the synagogue, which was packed with the greatest stinking mass of humanity I have ever seen. Of course, I have seen them since the beginning and marveled that beings alleged to be made in the form of God can look the way they do or act the way they act. He says, and then he gets castigated, but Truman writes to this guy, We appear to be treating the Jews as the Nazis treated them, except that we do not exterminate them. They are in concentration camps in large number under our military guard instead of SS troops. And apparently, he went on to complain that the Jews had no sense of human relationships, lived in filth like lazy locusts. He wrote that I know the expression lost tribes of Israel applied to the tribes, this is a quote, which disappeared, not to the tribe of Judah, from which the current sons of bitches are descended. However, it is my personal opinion that that too is a lost tribe, lost to all decency. It goes on, but the guy is actually opposed to the war crime tribunals in Nuremberg, which is the reason I mention this. He says, I am frankly opposed to this war criminal stuff. It is not cricket and is Semitic. Okay. So you go, well, that's pretty harsh stuff. You know what I mean? But it's signed General George S. Patton. And this is Representative Patton was not alone. This type of verbiage, Patton is publicly writing these letters to Truman and other generals because that is the sentiment, folks. That is the sentiment of the military regarding the Jews in Germany. And you wonder why they let these Nazis in. He meets a guy, Patton meets a guy, and he says, so you're General Dornberger. And he goes, yes, jawohl, General, he says, Dornberger. He takes out 2 cigars and gives it to him. He goes, are you the guy that invented those V2 rockets? He goes, yes, sir, jawohl. And he goes, you deserve this, you son of a bitch. We could never have done that. Slaps him on the back, gives him 2 cigars. Now, if you think about all the British people who were killed by those V2 rockets, it's enough to make you puke. But again, this is General Patton doing this. And you could say, well, he's a rogue general. He speaks comfortably in this verbiage, and he represents the current climate at the time in 1945, 1946. And that's why I read that, not to castigate Patton, because he's not alone. I mean, he's writing to Truman, who pushes back, saying we're treating these people. When Patton comes to the camps, the SS are kept on to supervise the Jews who are in the barracks. Just think about that sick move on the part of Patton. He keeps the SS as guards because they're so good at what they do in the death camps. Okay. And we all know this. Everybody knows this. We're all raised with this. We know this shit. It's not in the movie with George C. Scott. I'll tell you that much.
Good performance, though.
Great performance. Oscar level performance. But wow. Anyway, so a guy comes along. There was a guy named Chuck Allen. Now you say, well, who is Chuck Allen? Chuck Allen's an obscure guy in American history. Very obscure. Maybe an untold story kind of guy. Chuck Allen is a blue blood American who is a leftist, but has his roots going all the way back to the Mayflower. And he's a real firebrand, kind of a guy who would write for the Village Voice or the LA Weekly or some publication in 1955, 1959, 1960, 63. And he takes on the role of being the first Nazi hunter in America. Chuck Allen, he came out of Chicago. He was from, I think, Chicago or Detroit, but he dedicates his life. He writes a 3-part article for a magazine called Currents called Nazis in America or Nazis in Our Bedrooms or something. And it ignites quite a bit of attention. Now, nobody responds to it. Time magazine doesn't follow up on it. Nobody follows up on it. He's an independent journalist, originally from Philadelphia. So Chuck Allen, who used to be a star football player and a real brawler, decides to go after and dedicate his life to finding Nazis like these guys who are living in the United States. And he gets pushback he gets a 10,000-page file in the FBI. He's trailed by the FBI. He's Hoover's arch nemesis. He goes to a rally in 1963 in Chicago. And at this rally, he unveils what he has learned. Lives in Manhattan at the time, comes to Chicago, and he's got an entire apartment in New York filled with documents that he's gotten and testimony and written letters from survivors and death camp people who have survived and are identifying the people who are in the United States at the time. And Chuck Allen, this big bull Vance of a man, goes after the Nazis. And he has this rally in Chicago in 1963. And at the rally, he starts ranting and raving about the Nazis. And nobody's ever heard anything like this before. And all of a sudden, there is thousands of white mice released into the crowd. And the crowd starts to stampede. And they start breaking up, running because of mice. Just it's weird. There's white mice, thousands of white mice. And in the back of the crowd is a woman with a bag who unleashed the white mice. And it was a Latvian Nazi woman. And she said, don't come into our neighborhood besmirching Latvian people. In essence, she was a Nazi, worked in a death camp and blah, blah, blah. Now you say, well, that's a great invention. Where could you get that idea from? Same idea was used by Joseph Goebbels in 1930 during a screening of All Quiet on the Western Front, which was an anti-German film. And Goebbels himself went in with a bag of 1,000 white mice and dumped them into the theater, causing sheer havoc at the screening of a film that today the remake is nominated for an Academy Award and won a bunch of Academy Awards this particular 2 weeks ago. So Goebbels invented this white mice thing, and he got it from the brown shirts who used it. So here is, just to bring it across the Atlantic, the same exact technique used by Joseph Goebbels in a theater in Berlin in 1930 when All Quiet on the Western Front was released, and put a damper on a possible warlike fervor in Germany, right? Because it's about World War I, blah, blah, blah. So here is a woman using this Goebbels technique that was used in Germany in 1930 in Chicago. Chicago's filled with Nazis. So the crowd gets back together and they start to settle down. The mice, have dissipated. And now there's a crowd in the back of about 35 young men. Young, and I mean in their 20s in the back, 35 young men. And they take their shirts off, simultaneously take their shirts off. And underneath their shirts are SS uniforms. They're members of the American Nazi Party. And this is 1963. So to think that this had no effect on the United States is insane. The American Nazi Party directly is spawned from these Nazis flooding into Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles, and other cities. That's what I was getting at last week with the influence of Operation Paperclip. Didn't happen in a vacuum. Okay, these things do not happen in a vacuum. So a giant brawl breaks out. And again, it's communists versus Nazis. You don't know who to root for. The same brawl that happens in North Carolina, I think in 1974, 73, whatever. But this battle between the Nazis, and he was a left, I don't know, he was never a communist, Chuck Allen. He was just a far left dude. But anyway, the white mice thing by the Latvian women and the Nazis, I mean, he outs a guy who is a bishop in Chicago, bishop out of Michigan. And the bishop's name was Trifa, Viorel Trifa, Trifa. Chuck Allen outs this guy as being a Nazi from back in Ukraine, or I want to say, Romania. I'm sorry, take that back. He was a leader of the Iron Guard back in Romania. He was a Romanian Nazi. Not to be confused with the Ukrainian Nazis, a completely different group. So the Iron Guard,
variety.
There's a little variety. So the Romanian bishop, Viorel Trifa, has reinvented himself as a bishop in Chicago, as a Catholic bishop. And this guy, Chuck Allen, outs him. And that creates total chaos because he is being protected by J. Edgar Hoover. This guy's spying on commies, the priest. For Hoover now. So anyway, so this guy, Chuck Allen, gets under Hoover's skin, and he won't stop Chuck Allen. There's a woman named Hermine Braunsteiner. Okay, so who is Hermine Braunsteiner? She lives in Maspeth, Queens. So Chuck Allen finds out from a survivor of Ravensbrück that she was the mare, M-A-R-E, they called her the mare, which was a horse, who walked around with a whip in the women's death camp at Ravensbrück and whipped them until they were bloody messes and then put them into the gas chambers. Okay. She was the most evil of all the evil Elses of the SS, was this woman, Hermine Braunsteiner. Now you say, well, where could she be living? Well, she's living in Maspeth, Queens, with a guy who's a construction worker, an American guy named Russell Ryan. So what does Allen do? He just looks for every guy in the phone book named Russell Ryan. And he goes to like the third house.
Jesus.
Oh yeah. This is gumshoe investigative journalism. He's kind of like a private dick. He's not even I wouldn't even say investigative journalist, but keep in mind, this is all before Simon Wiesenthal. This is all before the Klarsfeld married couple who were Nazi hunters. This is a guy on his own outing Nazis and bringing them to light. And this throws an incredible monkey wrench into Operation Paperclip, because the one thing they fear is the bright sunlight of truth and democracy, and that scares them. That puts the fear of God into them and will eventually end Operation Paperclip around 1952-53 because of guys like Chuck Allen, one American, doing this, dedicating his life to this. Chuck Allen knocks on the door in Maspeth, Queens, of Bronsteiner, and there she is with her hair in rollers painting her apartment. And she says, "And who are you?" And he says, "I'm Chuck Allen. It's all over, honey." And she knows right away that her days are numbered and she will be deported back to Germany to stand trial. What this guy did, and no, this is not to take anything away from Simon Wiesenthal, who, was an incredible Nazi hunter. But it's almost like, these vampire hunters. You know what I mean? Like they're going around trying to drive a stake into Dracula. 1960, this guy is picked up, and this puts a real dent. May 11, 1960, a guy is picked up and his name is Adolf Eichmann. Adolf Eichmann is put into an El Al airport uniform, El Al pilot's uniform. He's drugged. They put sunglasses on him. They drag him out of where he was, and they put him on an El Al plane. He's sent back to Israel to stand trial in Tel Aviv in a glass booth. This puts the fear of God into all of the Nazis, because they know that if Eichmann talks, they're done. If Eichmann starts to spill the beans, they're finished. And there's a guy named Otto von Bolschwing. You can't make these names up. Otto von Bolschwing is the head of the Nazi Jewish Affairs Office in 1937 and writes the paperwork, the white paper, to deal with the final solution. He is the author of the final solution, working out of Berlin in 1937 as an SS lieutenant. Otto von Bolschwing is the second in command to Adolf Eichmann. And he starts to shit his pants in his wonderful Manhattan apartment. And the CIA comes to him and says, "You have to disappear." And he says, "F you, I'm not going anywhere. I am the head Nazi." And they brag about being great Nazis. These are guys who are not, changing their rap at all. I mean, they changed their rap so they wouldn't go to the hangman's noose. But once they were in New York and free for years, they were in the phone book.
It's insane. That Chuck Allen, by the way, that's like a whole episode in itself.
Yeah, I don't want to get that far to Chuck Allen, because Chuck Allen is an American hero. I mean, Chuck Allen's going to get his own episodes. There's a guy named William Hotel, who's a fervent Nazi. He was pursued by Allen Dulles, and he was caught. He was disliked by the SS, put it that way. He couldn't even get a recommendation from the other SS guys. That's how bad Hotel was. There was this bishop in Bavaria. There's a guy in Bavaria named Klaus Barbie, a.k.a. the Butcher of Lyon, right? So he lived
Klaus
with
Barbie. I've heard that name.
Yeah, Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon. Hey, wait a minute.
That Klaus Barbie?
The same Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon. This is 1986. I did a parody, I think it was, of the Klaus Barbie doll. Because
he was on the run, right?
No. He had been apprehended. He was not on the run. He was apprehended. He lived in a plush apartment supplied by American taxpayers, and they refused to turn him over to France. And the French demanded that we give them Klaus Barbie, and we refused. And Barbie was known as the Butcher of Lyon. He had been involved in the transport of hundreds of thousands of Jews to the death camps out of France. That's what Klaus Barbie did. Klaus Barbie flees to Bolivia from Bavaria, where he is then taken care of by U.S. intelligence.
And by
That's
the
how-
way, crossover there with DEA, cocaine running, and
Yeah,
CIA. Oh,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
long-
They
the
all get
traditional
involved
stuff.
in that. And in fact, he is not hiding. He is advising the head of Bolivia. He is a consultant to the government on how to torture. He's a consultant to the government on how to suppress left-wing violence in Bolivia. He is involved in cocaine trafficking, Klaus Barbie. Klaus Barbie in 1951, they took him to Bolivia, where up until the 80s, and when I did that piece for National Lampoon, the Klaus Barbie doll, when he was apprehended and taken back to France to stand trial, where he had been sentenced to death in absentia, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, where he lived out the rest of his life in prison. But that was like, I think, 1985, 86 when he was apprehended and brought back. And the reason I did the piece as a Barbie doll was that the trite media in France said, what is Klaus Barbie going to wear to his trial? Will he be wearing Louis Vuitton? Will he be wearing, it was just insane. You know, there's just all these different angles. So I said, oh, it's like, yeah, if you see both pages, you're able to clip and cut out and put the Klaus Barbie doll into different outfits, like, you know, Color Forms used to. I don't know if you remember Color Forms, but anyway, so getting back to Karl Wolf for a second. Karl Wolf, who is the friend of Allen Dulles, he is put into a POW camp when this Dulles thing wears off, and he is allowed to carry his gun, wear his Nazi uniform in the POW camp, and go, this is in Europe, and go on yachting trips with his family on the weekends. That's how bad it was for Karl Wolf. And he said a Jew killed in the gas chamber in a few seconds without having any idea or even knowing it. My comrades and I have been allowed to die every night for 21 months. This is much more inhumane than the extermination of the Jews. That's Karl Wolf. That's Karl Wolf.
Classy.
He will then be taken under our Operation Paperclip because obviously he knows things that we don't know. Karl Wolf will send a bill to the United States government for $50,000 for his legal bills, his clothing, and his wasted time in the POW camp for 21 months.
Let me guess, and we paid it, I'm sure.
No, I don't think we did. At least I haven't seen any explanation of that. Now,
He paid what was it, Otto Ambrose or whatever the hell is
right. Well, John McCloy apparently knows that there are death camps there, and he is the one that tells FDR not to bomb the train lines that are going into the death camps and not to bomb the death camps themselves. So we have him to thank for that. Many of the Polish underground came to American intelligence, British intelligence early on with the death camp maps, train lines, everything about what was going on. The Polish underground, having no dog in the hunt, urged the British and the Americans through McCloy to at least bomb the rail lines. So it would disrupt the train traffic of the cattle cars going into Dachau and Auschwitz and Buchenwald. McCloy refused. That's why McCloy gets the 90-year-old award, I guess, from Reagan in that little footage there. But I don't know who's best. I think we need like Nazi trading cards because there's a guy named Laszlo Ag, A-G-H, Laszlo Ag, and he was a Hungarian Nazi, Ag. And what did he do? He was the head of what was the Hungarian Nazi Party top group called the Arrow Cross Party. These were like the Azovs, and each country had their own Nazis, including Yasser Arafat's great uncle who ran the SS out of Palestine, that SS division that was run by the head of the Muslim religion in Palestine, Yasser Arafat's great uncle. But the Hungarian Nazi Party, the Arrow Cross Party, you say, wow, what could they have done? Well, this guy Ag had a huge ditch, and he told the Jews to run and jump into the ditch. And underneath the ditch were thousands of bayonets in the dirt that you couldn't see. So when you ran and dove into the ditch, you were diving onto these spears, and then you were ordered to eat your own feces. I don't know what the two things are together, but that was his claim to fame. And he was taken in by us. Hoover stopped his deportation when Chuck Allen found him. Hoover literally stopped the deportation of this guy. Why? Because he was domestically spying on communists in the United States. And that to Hoover was worth the price of admission. Yeah, I know. It makes you sick.
Yeah, such a happy episode.
You know what these guys were? They were the original Eurotrash.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
right?
Wow.
Right. Well, that's just a handful of the guys. There's the guy. Oh, this guy. What's this guy's name? Oh, the guy where they air it when they did the spraying of Alaska and San Francisco with that anthrax type material in the subways in the 60s. That spray technique came from Kurt Blaum, who had advised them on how to spray mist into populated areas. Here's Kurt. Yeah, he advised them on how to use aerial spray techniques in biological warfare. So we sprayed San Francisco with an anthrax-like chemical. It may or may not have been harmless because we don't really know the long-term effects, but that's been revealed as some MK Ultra program. And as we showed last week, when you were at Camp King, which is that building that Eric was showing, that's where the Nazis merged with MK Ultra and the CIA. That's where the two things merged: the torture and the drug use and the experimentation. All the Nazis came in, which leads me to a guy named Dr. Hubertus Strughold. Dr. Hubertus Strughold, here shown here by Eric with one of his chief political friends, a guy who helped support him through the years. Now, I'll just give you a background on Strughold. You say, well, who could this guy be? He was second in command at NASA for decades to Wernher von Braun. He was the father of space medicine, according to, yeah, here he is with his friend. That Strughold on the left and some obscure vice president on the right. Now, in this one, I think he's president by now. So the father of space medicine was needed to put men in space. You go, well, he probably knows what he's doing, Eric. I mean, why not? A guy with second in command, he's a friend of von Braun's. What could he have done? Well, apparently he worked at Dachau, right? And he had his own little thing there in Dachau. And he would take these prisoners and put them in tubs of ice, 30 below zero, big blocks of ice, naked in these tubs until they were dead, okay? And what he wanted to see was the Luftwaffe had pilots shot down over the English Channel in the Battle of Britain and other battles, and they died from thermic reasons of the water being too cold. So what the Germans, this guy in particular, was trying to do was to find out how to keep German pilots alive in ice water and how long they could physically live. Well, how do you do that? Well, you take some Jews and you put them in this tubs of ice water until they're dead, and you try to stretch it out, which he tried to do with alcohol, other just weird things that he tried to elongate. He tried to revive them from the dead once they were frozen to death. Hundreds and thousands of Jews were frozen to death by this guy, Strughold, second in command at NASA, to Wernher von Braun. And he also put the people in that 8-ball, high altitude. And this is, of course, shaking hands with the great one, Strughold with LBJ there. It's a great combination. He also did high altitude experiments, which meant reducing and raising the pressure in a pressure cooker thing like the 8-ball that we showed last week, until your head exploded and your eyes popped out of your head. You took photos of this. We saw the photos after the war of people's heads exploding, their eyes popping out from the alteration of pressure in the 8-ball. And this was to replicate the pilots. There it is. That's where he put him. This guy, Strughold, ends up working his entire career, and there's still awards in his name from NASA. They still have awards, despite what he did to human beings in Germany during the war. This guy was the father, was by NASA called the father of space medicine. And they claim that we couldn't have ever had a space program without this guy, which we pointed out in an earlier episode on Jack Parsons, that there was another guy named Jack Parsons who had a space program, and that was JPL, and he had friends that were able to put rockets into space, including Goddard, and we didn't need von Braun and these other cats. We had our own space, rocket program that was going on separate from the Nazis.
Don't we have another award to this day for another fine individual? This one.
Who was that guy?
Kurt Dubas or Dubas.
Oh, Dubas. Yeah, he gets awards from NASA every year too.
Yep.
He gets awards. Show me that picture of the guys on top of the V2 rocket. Remember that black and white photo? I show you the man on top of the rocket. Because we begin our own V2 rocket program. We launch a V2 rocket on, I want to say this, April 15th. Okay, this is a General Electric photo of the American, it says German V2 rocket on the side. This is in White Sands, New Mexico. These are the workers doing a comical Three Stooges type photo on top of the V2 rocket that General Electric, who wants these V2 rockets because they want to build them, and they're building them and shooting them off in White Sands, New Mexico, and at the proving grounds. So dig this. I'm going to show you a photo in a second with the one with the blue sky in the background, Eric, of a V2 rocket going off. The V2 rocket that you're going to see is launched successfully April 15th, 1946, less than 1 year to the day of the death of Adolf Hitler. This is a launch by us of our own V2 rocket less than a year after. We have taken the stuff here. We have reassembled it. We have built our own rockets, our own bases and everything else. And the second picture you're going to see is in May, a month later, of the second V2 rocket launch. And we would launch about 40 of these wonderfully into the deserts in New Mexico. One of them flew over El Paso. Here's the other one. I think this is May 15th, a month later. Some of these rockets went cockeyed, and this one almost hit El Paso, but flew into Mexico, where we had to make some apologies about this V2 rocket going into Mexico. But the reality of it is, that's what we wanted. We wanted that it had nothing to do. We had no space program. The space program would be an incredible gift to all these technological companies like GE and Bell and all the others. It was a gift. And was it exciting? Absolutely. Putting a man in space? Yeah. Did the Russians do it first? Yeah. Did they have any Nazi scientists? No, they gave them all back. They had no Nazis. They returned their Nazis to Germany like in 48, 47, 49. Some of them were imprisoned until years later, but that wasn't the scientists. Those were the military guys. But the Nazis that the Russians had, they said, no, thank you very much. They came up with their own V2 rocket on their own. They didn't need our or their technology. They put a man in space, Gagarin, before we did. They put an animal in space before we did. They launched a satellite before we did. How? If they were this backwards country, how were they able to do that? Well, they didn't have Nazis doing it. They did it themselves. It was a very advanced country, as we despite our propaganda.
Didn't we have people?
That's Molina. Now, Molina was part of the Suicide Squad out of Pasadena that started JPL with Jack Parsons. And I recommend that episode. You'll see Molina with Jack Parsons blowing crap up in Arroyo Seco, right over here by me in Pasadena. And these guys were known as the Suicide Squad. And this is before Jack Parsons gets into Crowley and some other stuff, but really when they were doing original rocket technology, Molina turns out to be a communist, ironically. And I think he got his security clearance taken away at one point.
Now, this would be the same Jack Parsons who envisioned the separation of the parts to launch the rocket into space.
Right. It wasn't Werner von Braun. Jack Parsons did that years before. And actually, this guy Molina, who was his best friend, the two of them, this thing here we put on top of the V2 and made into a two-stage rocket in a couple of months. I think in November of 1946, they will make it into a two-stage rocket. What they tried to do, and I'll get into this now, I don't know if we have time, but what they tried to do was now, because this bad press was leaking out about the Nazis, they began to write these wonderful cover stories about the Nazi scientists. They put the PR team together to begin papering over their pasts. Nobody was allowed to learn about the Nazi scientist's background after 1947 and 1948. There was a complete lockout of knowledge and information. And in fact, they put out a postage stamp, which I found last night, which Eric is now going to show you. They had the United States Post Office put out a postage stamp to commemorate Fort Bliss's rocket program. These guys were taken to Fort Bliss in Texas, by the way. I forgot to mention this. So they put out a stamp commemorating. Yeah, this is in El Paso. That rocket I showed you was the one that flew over El Paso and almost blew up Mexico.
Yeah, it's a 100-year anniversary. Why not shoot a V2?
Right. Okay. So it's 1948, but this was part of a campaign, a propaganda campaign to highlight the incredible genius of the wonderful, good Nazis that we got out of Germany. That leads to von Braun with Walt Disney. Walt Disney and von Braun meet and they fall in love. One guy's working for the CIA, von Braun, and Disney is a informer for the FBI, turns out historically. It's a marriage made in heaven. Disney and von Braun. So what happens Sunday night? They put on a show every week with Werner von Braun as the host, and he talks about writing these novels. Writes a novel about going to Mars. They always end up writing novels, these guys. Writes a novel about going to Mars, right? Writes one about the moon, but he writes one about the Mars. And he says, here's the genius of von Braun. He says, we're going to have a space station someday, an orbiting space station. And from that space station, we can launch nuclear missiles at the Soviet Union. That's in the book. And you go, well, that's kind of a romantic vision of space travel. This is where his brain, left to its own devices, would go.
Sounds like Star Wars in the 80s, too.
Right. But I'm saying nuclear missiles on board a space station. This was not the peaceful,
it wasn't Star Trek. Roddenberry didn't write this one.
Yeah, he didn't. Roddenberry didn't write this one. Well, who else do we leave out here of this great? Oh, we got Klaus Barbie. Let me think. We got Hodel. He was a good one.
We may have to go to part 3 for
some of these guys. Yeah,
Warren Commission and that tie-in. And
well, yeah, I mean, you're looking at McCloy, which leads us up to, I hinted at last week. It leads us almost full circle to the Kennedy assassination. You say, well, Mark, what are you, nuts? How can that possibly be? Well, you've got Michael Paine working for Dornberger. Michael Paine and Ruth Paine are married, or some kind of a thing is going on. He's over there. Here's a picture of these two guys together. Soon one of them should be fired in a few months, and after this photo is taken. You have a guy, what does he want to do? He wants to sign an anti-ballistic peace treaty with the Russians. The guy who's the president guy. That is the last thing on the planet Earth that these cats want. They have dedicated their lives, whether at NASA or in New York or at the Pentagon, to build a space race that is going to pay money to these companies ad infinitum. This is before the arms race, the space race, and the arms race, now with anti-ballistic missiles and ballistic missiles, is a gold mine, And this cat comes along, some moneyed fellow, and says, I'm going to put a stop to this with a Pax Americana, a peace in our time. Well, I mean, they didn't want to hear it. Let us put it that way. I mean, so you've got McCloy. He ends up on the Warren Commission. You've got Alan Dulles on this phone call that we have. It's not very audible, but I gave it to Eric anyway. It's a phone call between LBJ and Alan Dulles, telling Alan Dulles. It's not even a conversation, really. It's him telling Dulles, you're going to be on this Warren Commission, whether you like it or not. And Dulles just garbles some incoherent crap. You really can't hear what Dulles is saying here, but he says, yeah.
Sir. Yes. Alan Dulles, 2191.
Well, unpleasant news for you. We're going to name very shortly a presidential commission made up of 7 people, 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, 2 from the Republican public and one from the court. As a study group to go into this FBI report, this court of inquiry, and all the incidents connection to the assassination of our beloved friend. And you've got to go on that farming.
Beloved friend.
Beloved friend.
I know you can. I know you can. There's not a doubt about it. Just get ready now to go in there and do a good job. We've got to have America's got to be united in this hour, and try to be of any this hour. Try to be of any help, and you consider that my previous work, my previous job. I always do what's best. Thank you. I'll be talking to you, Father. Right, and I'll keep this entirely quiet. Please do, listen now, because I haven't cleared it with one other man. Bye. I'll be at your orders if you want. Thank you, sir.
Okay, we'll get back to you. All right, thank you, Ms. Dulles. Thank you. I know you're using your distortion device on your end, but I'm the president, so my voice has to be clear. Yeah, I mean, that's been altered from the Dulles side, but nevertheless, the message is the same when you see the transcript. It's LBJ telling Dulles, and it's not even LBJ's idea. I mean, this is because LBJ would normally say, how's your wife? How's your kids? What's going on? You still drinking? Whatever the hell. You could hear what he does with Earl Warren. You could hear what he does with some of the other people. Only with Dulles is it just business. It's just totally business with Dulles. The guy has no connection to the government any longer, and yet he has to put this guy on the Warren Commission. Yeah,
I kind of wonder, right? The guy that JFK fired, we definitely need to bring him in. But there's the crew.
It's a wonderful crew. I mean, we'll do an episode just on the Warren Commission at some point. But
there's McCloy right there, right?
Yeah.
Third from the left, I think, or all the way left.
Yeah, I think that's, it's hard for me to see, but I think that's him on the extreme left, or third from left. Yeah. So when LBJ gets this, they disband the Warren Commission, but keep in mind that Dornberger is still running Bell Helicopter, and the Vietnam War makes Bell Helicopter the equivalent of Exxon. I mean, Bell Helicopter, by losing, is that Dornberger there at the end? Yeah. Dornberger has a security team working for him that he builds at Bell Helicopter, one of those corporate security teams. And who has the clearance in that security team? None other than Michael Payne. Now, Michael Payne is running around with Lee Harvey Oswald all over Dallas. And you think to yourself, why, for the love of God, are the Nazis involved in this? And the love of God, I mean, you've got Werner von Braun involved with a program where JFK says we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, 1969, which does happen, and so you've got that link to Werner von Braun. And Kennedy shows up at these missile launches all the time and he knows who von Braun is. He's read the CIA files on all these guys. He knows that they're Nazis.
Well, he is with Kurt. I mean,
yeah. Don't forget, Kurt Waldheim is outed also by Chuck Allen a little later at the United Nations. I mean, these guys burrow into positions that are above reproach. They're not just working in delicatessens. The reason that we're so impressed by the Nazi hierarchy is that they speak multiple languages, they have multiple degrees, they come from money, they are elites in their world. And that is what always impresses Americans.
Like we are with the British.
Well, Europeans, I was going to say in general. Yeah. But yes, the British and the Europeans, yes. And they're always conning us. They're always like, they would talk among themselves how to dupe the Americans, the stupid Americans. And I mean, you're dealing with these colonels and you're dealing with generals and stuff. They want a certain thing and these guys want a certain thing. And they don't want to end up with the Russians because they want to end up with an apartment in Manhattan. And they told us whatever we wanted to hear, these guys. But I believe, and I'm sticking to it, there was a moral price to pay for allowing the Nazis of Operation Paperclip to infiltrate our society.
Yeah, I think we're still paying it.
And there may be even more to it than meets the eye in terms of the assassination of JFK. when I see Dornberger and von Braun and some other people close to this storyline, and I don't have enough to connect the dots between Dornberger and the assassination, but the connection for me is Michael Payne. That's a little weird. That's a little weird. And you can make what you want out of it, people, but the fact is that Michael Payne worked for General Dornberger at Bell Helicopter, and Bell Helicopter gave a lot of money to LBJ and lost a lot of helicopters in Vietnam.
Didn't they? Wait a minute. We covered it in the LBJ episode, and LBJ had his own dedicated Bell helicopter, didn't he?
That's where it came from. Yeah, that's where it came from. Yeah. They were in bed with him, giving him campaign money as a congressman. But the Bell helicopter, as Stone points out in JFK, before the war was on the balls of their ass economically. When the war takes off, they become this billion-dollar corporation because so many helicopters are shot down in Vietnam that they just keep replacing them. They end up coming up with this tail gunner thing with these different devices. They keep inventing new things for the war. Some of them rigged up by the soldiers themselves. But nevertheless, you've got a combination of Bell Helicopter, Texas, LBJ, Michael Payne, General Dornberger, and the Nazis. Look, I didn't make that up. I mean, I don't know what the connection is, but there's a lot of smoke there.
Yep, and while it's all distant to us, it was within not that long of a time period too.
Yeah.
From post World War II to early 60s.
Well, we're going to get into Curtis LeMay's involvement as when he attends the autopsy of JFK with his celebratory cigar, just blowing smoke into the autopsy room. So there's a lot of military on both sides, the Nazis and also our people who are not happy with our fearless leader.
Well, good times all around and on a happy episode. But what makes us happy? We have some tips coming in from locals. Got a lucky 69 watching on locals right now.
What?
Yep.
What happened to what did we have last week?
I don't remember on locals, but these are good numbers. But somebody's saying the footage with McCloy was on CBS with Walter Cronkite, and Oliver used it in JFK Revisited.
Okay, I'll look at it over there. Maybe that's where the last place I saw it. Okay.
It could be.
But it's not on YouTube any longer. They took it down.
Right. And Oliver probably got it.
He probably got it before it was taken down. That's why they took it down.
Well, I'm sure he licensed it and probably has good clean footage. Wells Mortensen sent a tip towards Mark's reading fund. Weird. I mean, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but thank you very much for the tip towards a reading fund.
Yeah.
MCDA sent a tip. How did JFK feel about Paperclip and the Yahtzees? Did he want to go to the moon, or was he coerced into it?
I don't know. I have not seen anything from JFK about Operation Paperclip, to be honest with you. I'm sure they kept their distance, but I mean, Hoover loved it and they didn't like Hoover. So I would presume, you're talking about a war hero. I mean, he fought in the South Pacific, but nevertheless, all of these guys who fought against the Nazis were appalled that they were letting them into the country. Every American citizen, anytime a journalist got hold of one of these stories, they blew it up to smithereens in the papers and the people went crazy. That's why the thing was secret. That's why the arming of the Ukrainians today is so dark and murky. This connection between us and the Ukrainian Nazis goes back to the summer of 1945, when we begin guerrilla activities against the Soviet Union out of Ukraine. If history doesn't repeat itself, in this case, it barks.
It rhymes for sure.
Yeah.
Wells Mortensen also said Mark's reading list on your website as an episode reference for all of us with extra time to spare, please. Someday that would be a hell of a list to try to compile. They'd like to have a list of everything you're reading. I mean, we could barely get I
could barely read this. I don't have time, bro. I don't have time. Not to be rude, but I don't have time to read the stuff, let alone put together a list.
Yeah, no kidding. So on here we have some people here. Scott Grumpy, I agree. Paperclip corrupted us. We're paying for it now.
That's the whole thesis. My whole thesis since I was a teenager. Okay, so when I was growing up, like I said in a couple episodes, we inherited this World Book Encyclopedia from some aunt, and it had like, I don't know, 26 volumes. It wasn't the World Book, it was a knockoff. And it only went up to 1939. So I was brilliant up until 1939. Then I knew nothing. So
you're like AI, because
Yeah,
AI stopped at a year. And
so when you looked up Hitler, it said current chancellor of Germany. I swear to God, in the book, in the book, it said current chancellor of Germany. And then it didn't have World War II. It had the Great War, and there was no entry for World War II yet. So it was a fascinating little world. We were just too cheap to get a new encyclopedia set. So from that time on, I learned about Operation Paperclip after the war, and I've just been enamored with this thing. And I've had the theory since I was in college that this morally led to the decay. And if you look at our G. Gordon Liddy episode and his references to Hitler and the Zig Eils and the Fuhrer references and the people surrounding Nixon, from Ehrlichman to Haldeman to Ziegler, I mean, all of the Germanic people that surrounded Hitler, surrounded Nixon, it is very, very interesting what goes on through the world of G. Gordon Liddy, which is another episode you might want to take a look at.
Definitely. Catherine S. Dulles is a complete slime ball. Kennedy was right to fire him. By the way, Dulles Airport, guess who it's named after? His brother.
I didn't know that, but it was one or the other. 50-50.
Some Dulles.
The thing about Dulles is he, runs the spy program for us during World War II out of Switzerland, which he does. But when he starts making those deals with the Nazis, I believe, and I'll say this again, that's the beginning of the Cold War. Right there is the start of stabbing Stalin in the back. Not that Stalin's a great guy, for whatever reason, Truman melted 2 cities of Japanese, but I mean, you could say that he's not a great guy either from some foreign country's point of view. However, and Stalin killed millions of people, whatever it is, we had a deal. Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt had a deal to not negotiate with the Nazis. Dulles on his own, I believe, intentionally started the Cold War.
I believe it. And Patton was totally in the bag too, wanting to start it. And these generals leading to Kennedy, they wanted to bomb the Soviet Union.
The Patton letter, as outrageous as that sounds, is not in a vacuum. I'll just put it that way. They were auctioning off some of his letters at Sotheby's a couple of years ago, and I just wanted to see. I didn't buy the letters, but I read them, and they are similar in tone to that. I mean, they're outrageous.
Wow. Sparty Matt, right here on time. This is why I love history and Mark's research. The more dots you find, the more all the things going on today, Ukraine, wokeness, deep state, etc., begin to make complete sense. Agree.
It didn't come out of a vacuum. I mean, there was a Ukrainian group of Nazis that in 1945 that volunteered to attack the Soviets with sabotage and guerrilla movements, and sounds like today.
True. And I pulled this one earlier, but just to address something. No mention of George Soros and his collaboration with the Nazis in Hungary.
No,
we don't have enough time for all the Nazis. I mean, but there's lots of Nazis to go.
No. First of all, Soros is not a Nazi; he's a Jew. But
right.
he collaborated with others in outing Jews and the Einsatz group and some other German Nazi groups that came into villages, but he is not. He's just a kid at the time. He's like 17 years old. He's not. We're dealing with military bigwigs at this point in the storyline here.
Right, but even then, I just wanted to say we can't cover all the Nazis. There's too many Nazis. We just don't have enough time. It's a Nazi Rama show.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is already demonetized, folks. So yes, this episode, YouTube did figure it out. And,
Bob, look, they keep talking about the Nazis. We had to do something. What do you mean? They've said it 500 times over there, this channel. Well, maybe the supporters can help out with some PayPal or
no, they're helping here.
Thank you. More. These are. Oh, by the way, the movie pick of the week is Marathon Man.
Good movie, God.
Right, but it's relevant because of Zell, who comes out of South America with his brother, is in New York to look for the diamonds, who is the Weiße Engel, the white angel, who is supposed to be Mengele and has a lot of ramifications to Operation Paperclip today. So I recommend Marathon Man as a tie-in movie for the day. And also, these are my favorite books. If you want to read about the Nazis, read The Nazis Next Door by Eric Lichtblau, which is great. Obviously, Operation Paperclip by Annie Jacobson. And this book by Christopher Simpson, which I had to buy with the Venmo money, is Blowback by Christopher Simpson, another great book on the Operation Paperclip. There's others, but people want to know what books I'm reading to get this information. There's just 3 out of like 6.
Yeah, like the original book, I think it was Linda Hunt, who discovered this in like the 80s. And I don't know if you heard about that, but
yeah,
the government, when they turned over the documents or the Freedom of Information request, gave her a bill for $125,000 and said, "Here, pay us for copying."
Let me tell you something. That's what happened to Ratzo at Lampoon when he was writing "Steal This Dream," the Abby Hoffman biography, and he wanted the Abby Hoffman FBI file, and they said, "Here it is, finally, Freedom of Information Act, $98,520." Ratzo sued the FBI and he won. They were charging $1 a page. He got it down to a penny or some ridiculous amount that you have to pay a little bit to get these copies. But it was done intentionally because of Hunt and Ratzo and others to stop you from getting files after the free. They were charging up to $1.50 a page.
Just sick. It is some sicks. Pasha, Mark, these stories are not just great info and good entertainment for us, but should be told to a much wider audience. How can we help you do that? Well,
you can help me with the Yiddish word of the day, which is abyssal. And Pasha knows what abyssal is. Abyssal is a little tiny bit. Abyssal, Pasha. You can help abyssal with the $5.
Right. And you can also tell a friend for free.
Oh, yeah. You can tell a friend or Venmo and PayPal. We get more books in the house. I got to get another place to put the books, because some people who are here are getting upset that there's too many books here. And I ain't going to mention any names. I don't know if this place is big enough for the two of us. Dina from Seoul. Okay, Dina. Now, look, Dina, thank you. From Seoul. You're in the house. How do you like that show? Just taking it out of my ass and putting it up here today, demonetized.
But Dina wants to know, so what is going on? Well, I think we covered that.
What, today? With Nazis today? Or
yeah. We've got definitely a pile. Mr. Mike, question: Roswell cover up for testing Nazi rockets? I don't know.
I've said this, and we'll go over this at some point in Area 51 episode. From what I understand, Stalin heard the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, the Mercury Theater on the air, Halloween, and 1939, I believe, and Orson Welles, and he was flabbergasted, according to sources, that the American people were duped by this. He was fascinated and flabbergasted, and he he had a ship attached to the bottom of a Russian bomber, a glider, that flew over the Bering Strait, unleashed the thing. It crashed in New Mexico, had 2 human teenagers in there who were dead, who had some sort of intentionally mocked up skull surgery. And this was, again, a propaganda attempt on the part of Stalin to put the fear of God into the American people, and it worked. So we're going to explore that a little later in another episode, but that briefly answer your question.
All right, Lost in Tunes. Have you guys seen the movie Jojo Rabbit? Yahtzee's dark comedy, good flick.
Hard to combine comedy with the Nazis, but I mean, the only guy really able to do that was Mel Brooks. I mean, when he has Springtime for Hitler and the producers, it's hard. It's a thin line.
All right. Let's see. Pushcart Jimmy, how you doing?
Hey, Pushcart.
I got you watch.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, that was pretty good. With Henry, what was it from Laughing, who was the little leader of the Nazis? I forget his. What's the guy's name? He was on Laughing.
I don't remember.
Oh, you will, Hunley.
No, I won't. Pasha, Bissell, Yiddish. In Bison.
Bissell is Yiddish. Yeah, Bischen is German. Okay, that's right. He's right. 218. I don't know if 218 covers it, but we're going to have to live with it.
On that note, we do have merch below. I've been holding up this pedestrian grill bear, but good news, get out of here. Oswald is
look who's back. Look who's back.
The Patsy is here, and everybody, you can grab one below. We have merch. It all helps very, very much. And I'm happy to have Oswald back at home.
Back and bigger than ever.
That's right. He's back. He's here. And let me see. Oh, a couple more tips out of locals. Thank you very much. Yep. Serona Repins, thank you so much for all you do. The letter from Patton blew my mind. My parents both served in World War II. My mom was an Army nurse anesthetist in the ETO. Wells Mortensen, Eric, no need to read. Great nephew of double hero of Soviet Union here. Awarded for cleaning planet of the Syatsy Scourge, equivalent of a Bronze Star. Guys rock, so keep trucking. Here's some peanuts for the effort. But hey, there are my peanuts, and now they're yours. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still cheering for the reading list, knowing that most of the material's available. Otto sent a tip. Bissell for the jar. And Bust sent a tip as well. Just love learning so much from you both. The truth is so precious, and please keep providing us with episodes and information.
I'm going to put up on Locals a poem by Lenny Bruce where he speaks as Adolf Eichmann at his trial. And it's a poem about Eichmann with Lenny doing a Germanic voice, talking about his, not bragging, but explaining his point of view of killing people in the gas chambers as opposed to dropping atomic bombs on them like some other leaders done. Very interesting poem by Lenny Bruce, which will be exclusively on Locals.
That should be quite dark.
Oh, it's dark. It's dark. Apparently true from the trial.
All right. Well, we're going to lighten things up a little.
Hey, I'm in a good mood. I feel better having, gotten this off my chest. I'm not depressed over this. I feel better that the American people now know what I know.
Yeah, not only that, all the reading you've been doing.
Yeah, my head hurts. I got it. If I read about one more Nazi, next week we'll do something different.
Yep, we already got it in line, but we're not talking about yet. But Freeform Friday, we have Rich Barris coming on and talking about
you're talking about the pollster?
The pollster. And coincidentally, he ran a poll on whether the CIA or people think the CIA was involved in the JFK assassination.
Oh, this is going to be
good. This fits right into everything lining up. Some other polls are going down on the presidential side. So we're going to hang out with Rich, have a good time on Friday, and I hope to see everyone then.
That's it?
That's it. We're off the hook.